Ryan's idea to do raising kids in a chaotic world, raising, I mean the title is something like that. But how to raise, just guidance for raising children in the world we live in today. And the one thing that I keep on taking away from this class over and over and over again is intentionality. So being intentional about the things you're doing with your kids. And what's cool about this class is we have parents who have brand new babies, and we have parents who are sending their kids to Berlin for college. So you get a big spectrum of things in between the way. And so we set up in tables so we can share experiences and share knowledge between each other. I remember one of the things that people told Casey and I when we first had kids was, your kids are little, you make sure you listen to the stories they tell you, even though they are nonsensical, and you'd rather be doing just about anything than listen to the randoms of what we're talking about, right? Because when they get older, you're going to want to hear those stories, and they need you to share those stories with. So make sure that you're always listening to your kids. And I'm sure there's people that have stories that when their kids, my kids are just entering middle school and elementary age. And so parents who have high school kids, share your knowledge about that as well. I was thinking my kids, Casey and I are by ourselves this weekend, so my kids are with my parents in Midland. And on the way home from Midland, I told Casey I heard, in my opinion, the worst song out there, because every time I hear it, it makes me feel just guilty. The Cat's in the Cradle. Right? So, for those of you who may not know, probably everybody does know, right? The kid's dad always puts him off because work or something else is more important. But the kid always tells his dad, I want to be just like you, Dad. And it's not till the end when the dad, looking back, and wants to call the kid to spend time with him, the kid puts him off because his life is not too busy. And the dad realizes that his kid had grown up just like him. In Psalms 90:12, the psalmist prays for us to know the number of our days. That the things that we do today are going to matter for a long time. And we only have a short window of time to have that influence in what we do. So full circle intentionality of what we do is what we're trying to get across in this class. But today, like I said, much better than last week, at least for me. I'm talking about spiritual growth of our children. For those of you who are not like in a table setting, if you're like in the rows, maybe make your own group. The first thing I wanted to talk about today in a group setting was a question: what attributes do you want your children to have as adults? And I guess it's like a softball question, but put some thought into it. What do you want your children to look like when they're your age, when they have their own children, when they're interacting with you as grown adults, with your peers and their colleagues? What attributes do you want your children to have as adults? And we'll do this pretty quick, maybe a couple of minutes going through this. Different ideas for their kids? Broader, more specific?
Empathy and a heart for people who are disadvantaged or struggling.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Amen, sister. We were just talking about that.
Resilience.
Resilience, yeah, that's a good one. That's great. Loyalty. What would loyalty, like loyalty to the family, loyalty specific there? Just very broad. Very broad, okay.
We also talked about, I don't know how to put it in a single word, but just the importance of our kids realizing how important their relationship with Christ is. Not just that they know Christ and that they're a good person, but that they actually have that relationship.
Personal relationship.
Yeah, personal relationship.
Josh, we can put a chair for you.
Yes, I was going to say there's an extra one right over there.
When everybody wants
called out in class.
Can you get a special chair?
They gotta sing a song.
It's like Texas Road.
Don't be listening. Okay, anybody else? I like those so far.
Skeptical / discerning.
Good sermon. In the two verses I pulled out specifically for us, just to go through, this idea of growing our kids to be what we want them to be in the future. One of my favorite Bible translations or Bible assist right now is the Amplified Bible. The Amplified Bible takes what could be a very complex word and gives you a whole lot of depth to what that word means. And so in Matthew 5:48, after Jesus sets the bar really high by going on the Beatitudes and saying how we're supposed to be in God's kingdom, he wraps it up by saying, "You therefore will be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect." And then the Amplified Bible adds, "You therefore will be perfect, growing into spiritual maturity, both in mind, character, actively integrating godly values into your daily life as your Father in heaven is perfect." The word perfect there is not so much of pristine or without fault or blameless. The idea here is this process that we're going from beginning to end. You're on a marathon. You're running a race. That your journey is not complete from day one, but it's complete at the end. And I like that idea for our kids as parents, right? That we can hold ourselves to really high standards and understanding that we're ourselves as parents and we have plenty of room to grow. And then for our kids, to teach them that we look for you to be growing always in your faith with Jesus. That same word is used in Ephesians 4:11 and James 1:2, if you wanted to dig into it. And the next thing I thought of was in 1 Peter. Peter says, "But like the Holy One who called you, be holy yourselves in all your conduct, because it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy." And that word holy, to be set apart from the world by your godly character and moral courage. Both these words, perfection and holiness, when you read them the first time, it's at a really high bar, I think. It can be intimidating for your kids to hear. The word holiness, to me, I think I would love to attend like a semester-long class on just what is holiness. That word is so deep and has so many meanings to it. But Peter says that we are to be holy, like God is holy. That we should teach our children to be holy, like God is holy. Setting ourselves apart so we can be uniquely close to God's presence. Last week we talked about two topics specifically on sexuality, and we had a lot of don'ts in that class, that we don't want our kids to do this, and we don't want our kids to watch this or see these things. Our kids can hear a lot of don'ts. In this class, I want to be talking a lot about the do's. What do we want our kids to be? What do we want our kids to aspire to? And holiness is one of those things. But kids today don't use the word holy all that often. So a question that I like to ask a lot is why? Why should our kids be holy? Why should our kids aspire to be perfect? And it sounds like a really dumb question to ask, but I think it's a question your kids will ask you, right, if you tell them to be holy. So why do we want our children to be holy? That we need to do a better job as parents of communicating those things. There's a book, I don't remember who gave me this book or who recommended me to read this book, but it's Be a Better Dad Today. I think I read it like when we first started having kids, and I haven't touched it since. The guy who wrote the book, he's like I think he's like a venture capitalist businessman, and so he talks a lot in business language for parents. But one of the things he talks about in this book is developing a family vision for who you want your family to be, and writing those things down and making sure your kids know about it and your kids buy into it. So he asks questions when you put together your family vision. What will your children remember about their childhood? What do you want your children to be known for as adults? How will your children treat their spouse and their children? And what is truly important in life? We have some friends who have a family vision for their family, and they framed it and they put it in their kitchen or someplace where everybody can see it on a daily basis. They're reminded of who our family wants us to be and who we've agreed to be. I'm going to read you the guy's vision he wrote for his family. I'm not going to read all of them. I'm going to skip some things. But just to give you encouragement to do this for yourselves. For Gregory Slatton, this is his family vision. We are and will strive to be a family that serves the Lord, each other, and our community for good. As we grow up together, we'll do everything we can to preserve and deepen the bonds between us. Bonds of faith and love and joy. We will treat each other with kindness, always believing the best about each other. We will give each other the benefit of the doubt, and will stick up for each other in thick or thin. Once married, we, the younger generation, will not divorce our wives and husbands. We will honor the example of our parents, praying diligently for one another and serving one another as Christ himself served us. We will have a noble family vision of our own, which will be in some ways different from this one. The most important elements we will do our best to pass on to our children. In the years to come, we will continue to honor our parents by caring for them. When tough times come, as they will, we will stick together and fight it out together. We will go to the aid of any family member who needs help, anytime, anywhere. We will always be honest with each other, but in the love that Christ himself has shown for us. We will pray for one another and for each other's families. We believe that the diligent, effective prayer of the righteous is very, very powerful. May the God of all creation help us bind our hearts together and bring this vision to pass. Amen. In the book, he goes through writing that him and his wife took the first pass at it. I don't know how old their kids were when they did this, but then the kids read it and bought into it or added to things. So it was really a family vision that everybody could agree to. Goes back to that point of being intentional on the things that we're doing with our families. So that's the easy part, is writing the vision. Once you paint the picture, how do you get there? That's your problem to figure out. I think everybody's going to be different of what they aspire for their families to be. Everybody has different situations in their lives. Their families all are unique. So trying to say how you're going to solve that in a class like this would be extremely difficult. But going back to the sexuality discussion we had, just as an example, those are discussions that you don't enjoy having with your kids. I think Casey and I have done a pretty good job of doing that stuff, but when I look back at it, like, for me at least, she does better than me. Like, we do it like once, we talk like once every 6 months on that topic, or once a year on that topic, and it feels like we're doing a lot of it, but it's just a small drop compared to everything else that our kids are hearing and seeing. And it's the same with everything else about this, is you have to make sure you're making time to show your kids where you want them to be when they grow up. One of the big questions about spiritual growth is maybe more specific to Churches of Christ than other churches, is this idea of baptism. Our oldest daughter is going into 6th grade. She has not been baptized. Her brothers are actually probably more engaged in the conversation about baptism than she is. But I think it's another valid question, and this is a group. I'm going to go on a limb here, hopefully get some response to this. Why do we want our children to be baptized? A lot of churches, a lot of faiths don't put the priorities that we put that on. I think some do, but some don't. So why is that important to your family? Or why was it important to your kid if they are baptized to do that?
So it's interesting because I think it has a lot to do with tradition, but you look at like someone that's like Catholic or if you're Jewish, right? They have like, if you're Catholic, I don't really understand the process, but it's not one of those like, you gotta like come to us, we're gonna give you a bunch of hints like my dad did, but like, hey, you're gonna be confirmed at X age and this is gonna happen, right? That's the end of it. Yeah. Or for me, it was like, once I started, back to a certain age, my dad started dropping a bunch of hints and I finally got it. Okay, yeah, I think it's time to get baptized, Dad. So like,
Right back down.
but like then I would see like friends that like were more, I think it wasn't really a spiritual thing, it was more like just the nerves of getting in front of people. So if a kid that's timid, but is probably mature enough to get baptized,
Yeah.
is less likely to go up to the parents and say, hey, on Sunday morning church, I want all this attention.
Yeah.
So I think it is important, but I feel like based on our traditions, we've kind of turned it into something where it's not really the best probably indicator of how spiritually mature your kid is.
Yeah, it's good. Well said.
We had
What
a,
hints did your dad give you, just out of curiosity?
He would just have these, like, I'd be in the car and he'd have these really serious conversations with me. Like, it's really time, son, blah, 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 blah. And after what? And I went to a retreat, like, when I was in 9th grade, and I was like, okay, I think I get it now. Like, a good moment to just get it done.
Okay, so what I learned from that is the best time to have a conversation with your kids is not to get in the car. Got it. All right, anybody else?
we had a bit of a anti-baptism. Well, 'cause
Weird.
it was, well, Andy was young, he was probably 4th grade, 3rd grade, somewhere around there, and everybody was starting to get baptized in our group, and he was like, I want to get baptized. I'm like, well, you don't know what it means to be baptized yet. You don't have that concept and of truly understanding what it is. And he kept asking over time, and this one was like, not until you truly get it. Not until you truly understand what it means to take this on and walk this path and really get it. And so it wasn't until he was
You're a little more emphatic than I am. Might be over something.
That's what. So it wasn't until what, he was 11 or 12 that he finally,
Three years later or so?
yeah, that he finally was getting that understanding.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's
we did.
interesting that you say that because, we've talked about this and Kristen and I've talked about it. We're going through it right now. Obviously, Addie's excited to get baptized next Sunday, which is awesome. But we talked a lot about, is she mature enough to really understand the gravity of her sinfulness at this age to truly make the decision, right? But then on the other side, it's like you don't want to, the right word is here, stem the
Yeah.
tide of the spirit, or also their own excitement. I know you're the one that actually said that to me in a conversation. Like you don't want to dampen their excitement for it, and if you really push back on that, you're doing more harm to them spiritually than you are good. So and even she and I have gone back and forth on this a lot, and so it is a challenging conversation of like, are they ready or not? Ultimately, I think for us, we just kind of decided, you know what, like we're gonna pray about this, and if she feels really strongly about it, we're just gonna trust that God's taking care of it, and and keep moving. But it was a tough conversation, I think, for us.
I think that's totally valid because let's be honest, some of us as adults are not completely mature enough to take that on, to say, I'm done with that old self. We have that battle daily, hourly sometimes, where I'm going to put that sinful human side of me away, and I'm going to do my Father's will instead. We
Yep.
struggle with that all the time.
Absolutely.
So
Well
whether
said.
you're 8 or 88,
So there.
it's-
I can't speak to the 88.
Well,
I
I feel like also when I was a kid, whenever the communion plate would go by and I wasn't allowed to partake in it,
You look like that.
yeah. Oh, that was a field trip
Yeah.
every week.
Yeah. So we solved that problem by giving everybody.
Yeah, exactly.
So we actually, from the time our kids were little, like we had people say, not at this church, but before we moved here, like, judging, like people can judge you that we let our kids take communion when they were toddlers.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I didn't want, Daniel and I always went through, like, his experience of baptism was campground. My experience was, I was 13, my dad was the preacher, it was time, and I wanted communion.
Yep.
And so we did not want that to be our kids'
Sure.
experience, and they just wanted to take communion. And so we just celebrated this last week, their 1-year baptism birthday. And the why to me was that they showed interest in having a relationship with God. Not, I want to take communion.
Yeah, I think so. It's pretty funny that we're assessing it's motivator.
I think the interesting thing to your story too to me is like, despite the motivations that each of you had along the way, God used those motivations eventually to bring you to where you are today, right? So that was kind of, we kind of talked through this, because I didn't feel like I was, well, at the time I did, but looking back, I'm like, man, I don't know if I was ready when I got baptized. But looking back, I'm like, well, God used that also throughout my journey.
But to that point, even if you were to get baptized today, 20 years from now, would you look back and say,
I was
man, I was so not ready for this?
Right,
I mean, the reality is we're
right.
continually growing, so a 13-year-old versus a 40 versus a 16 at any point of reflection.
I think also a big part of it is, it's not, are you spiritually ready? Because it's almost like saying, hey, who can jump to the moon? No one can, right? I can maybe jump a little higher than my kids can, but I'm still way off of the moon. So I think it has more to do with being old enough to take ownership of your faith.
Yeah.
So we kind of went through this with foster kids because it was a big deal, right? So we're a Church of Christ Children's Home, so baptism was heavily emphasized. And these kids would come to us and they'd be like, yeah, I want to do this. And we're like, whoa, we know what you did like 25 minutes ago. Sure. But the reality was, it wasn't our decision to make. And so that was kind of where we had to come to, was simply that this was kind of our faith that they wanted to make. And we're going to accept their word that what they're doing. We're going to counsel them to the best of our ability, but this is their decision, this is their decision.
All awesome stuff. In big, broad terms, something I want to do a better job with my children is focusing on the whole story of the Bible with them. I think we're really good about teaching Bible stories, and then can sometimes be really good about preaching on a specific topic or teaching on specific topics with our kids. But then painting the whole picture of the Bible with them is something that I want to do a better job with my kids. So with baptism specifically, just going through the Bible and painting the picture of what baptism is and how that ties in to God's plan of salvation. Water in the Bible plays a huge role, and it all connects together as you put these dots together. In Genesis 1, God brings salvation or brings promise to creation by separating the waters and the dry land. So providing, out of the chaos, providing a way for humanity to thrive by splitting the waters. In Genesis 6 through 8, that's the story of Noah. It's a story of decreation. It's the creation story in reverse. So instead of the waters being split, the waters come up and they take out creation. But this new theme in the Bible is created, that God saves the remnant, provides salvation for a remnant. In the case of Noah, he brings it through the water. So Noah is safe passing through the water in the ark that God's provided. And then in Exodus 2, Moses, as a baby, is rescued, he's put in the water, and actually an ark. It's the same word in both locations, in Genesis and Exodus. He's put in an ark or a basket, provides his salvation again through the waters. And then in the story of Exodus again, the Israelites are fleeing oppression, and God again splits water and provides a way for people to walk through dry land by splitting the water apart. The same thing he did in creation, providing a way through for salvation. Same story, almost in repeat, happens in Joshua, as when the Israelites go from the wilderness into the promised land, and God provides that path again by splitting the water so people can have a way from chaos into the promised land, into humanity. Then in Matthew, all 4 gospel accounts are very specific about recording that Jesus is baptized and goes into the water and out of the water. Again, this idea of one repeating the story of going from the wilderness into the promised land at the Jordan River, but also this idea of new creation, splitting the water and coming back to recreate creation. Just cool stuff for me, at least. I did not get to talk about what I went through last week, so I'm going to talk about what I went through this week. There's just to me cool stuff. The word divided or split is used in Mark's gospel in 2 locations. It's the same word that's used in Exodus when the Israelites pass from the oppression side to the freedom side of the Red Sea. This Greek word for split. When Jesus goes through the water, he's baptized and comes back up. The heavens are then split apart, and the Spirit comes down like a dove, starting the story of Jesus' ministry here on earth. And then in Mark's gospel, when his ministry is concluding on earth, that same word is used again, split, to describe the way the curtains open up in the temple. Just cool stuff to me. After each one of those, Mark 1 and Mark 15, the verse immediately after that is a proclamation of who Jesus is. So the first time God says, "This is my son, with him I am pleased." Trivia question in Mark 15, who proclaims who Jesus is? In Mark 15, after the temple curtain splits. Peter? Peter? The guards, yes, Roman soldier. So both times proclaiming who God is. All right, so to me, what is baptism? I think all your stories were awesome and spot on, absolutely. But we're painting this picture for our children. It's a connection to God's story of creation for our kids. That, hey, your life it was chaotic. This is the way you pass through the waters and come back into the land, to the idea of the promised land. It's God's rescue and deliverance from the wilderness for you as an individual. And you paint that story for however you want to with your kids. But again, having a conversation, I think, is the important part. All right, so table discussion. Number 1, what were you taught about baptism as a child? And does that differ with how you talk to your children now, or how you will talk to your children now? Tiffany already pointed out differences from how they did things. That's awesome. Share that with your group. And then, we've already hit on this a little bit, but when is a mature age for your children to be baptized? I don't think there's a right answer to that question, but just more or less a conversation topic. So we'll do a few minutes of this and come back together. Anybody want to share?
I just made the comment, kind of like what Tiffany said earlier. Growing up with a dad that was a preacher, I got baptized because of what was expected. I mean, it wasn't really a big decision that I made. It was like, oh, this is how old I am now. I guess I don't get baptized. But
What age was that?
I was 9 when I got baptized. With our daughters, though, when the conversations have come up, it's been more of a, okay, well, tell me what baptism means to you and why you feel like that's what you're next step is. And not to discourage the spirit, like you're saying, but make sure that they do have that understanding. Brylan got baptized right about 2 years ago, and like the comment, the kids are a little more timid. It may discourage them from wanting to get up. And she came to us and she said, I'm ready to do this, and I'm not going to do it on a Sunday morning. I don't want everybody there. I want this to be between me and God and my family, and that's what I want. And can't argue with that.
Yeah.
And so that's what we did. But like right after she was baptized, then instantly Jason starts, well, I think I'm ready to do this too. And so we had lots of talks with her about, are you wanting to do this because you saw the attention that your sister got, or your intention is real. And again, not to discourage anything, but it was very quickly obvious that she had no clue what she was wanting to do. Now, 2 years later, we're probably getting closer to that case. But as far as when as a mature age, I was saying, there were kids in my youth group that I grew up with all through church that didn't get baptized until we were well into high school, late high school, even in college age. Because looking back at it now, I'm like, they were waiting until they were ready to make that choice and that commitment. Where at the time I was like, what's wrong with you? Why haven't you done this yet? But as an adult looking back at it now, I respect that decision.
This might be the communion's the motivator. Once you take communion for the first time, like they
So that's what's funny about with Brylan. She got baptized in the summer of 2020, so she had never experienced actual passing of the plate and having communion. And when I guess it was on Mother's Day, we went to visit my brother and sister-in-law in San Angelo and my dad, and their church had recently just started passing the plate again, and she's like, this is almost like this is my first time really
That's cool.
experiencing it like it should be experienced.
Great, we should go back to trade.
I agree.
Okay, let's do vote for trades.
3, or
Anybody else?
please pass the trade for the back.
I think there's a lot more conversations related to intentionality with baptism now. I mean, when I was a kid, it was kind of like the next step of expectation versus with my own children, I feel like there's a lot more conversation around what is your intention, what is your desire, what is your kind of like. And to your point, I was kind of like, okay, so this is the age, we're moving overseas, we should do this before we leave, so like, let's go ahead and schedule it.
Sexual edit. Like a dental cleaning.
I have enjoyed seeing how different churches do the baptism tradition. Like a lot of community churches, I think they have like Baptism Sunday, where one, I guess you can sign up for Baptism Sunday, but then as you feel yourself to get moved, you just walk up and get baptized with everybody else, which probably as a kid I would have thought that was the wrong way to do things. But I see some coolness in that hey, we're all doing this together as a church, as a community. When Casey's sister, our nieces, had her baptism, our church did like a big slideshow thing for the kids, and there was a big production, and the dads, I think you call the dads, right? The dads were the ones who were going to baptize the child. So maybe a little bit bigger show, quote, quote, than we would do at Church of Christ. But again, I appreciated the intentionality of, hey, Dad, you're going to be the one doing this, and make a thing out of it. Anybody else from their groups?
We were talking about our experience with Isaiah. And just the fact that it probably scarred us a little bit. And we still don't know if we handled it well. I don't think we did, but it was several years of only asking when a friend got baptized, right? When somebody else got baptized, I want you baptized too. We would always come back with why, try to assess, the motivation, and be real intentional in telling them that, if he said, if it's because I want to follow Jesus, I was always quick to point out, but you do things already to follow Jesus. You are a Christ follower, and, this is different from that. It's a little bit more than that. Let's study about it. And be like, okay, and so I would say, I want you to come tell me when you're ready to send. And 5 minutes after his friend got baptized, when we had that conversation, I never heard about it. And so that to me was always the indication that this was not something that was truly on his heart. Well, this went on for like 3 years, and every time he would ask, and we would have the same conversation over and over again, it started to get more and more emotional, like, why can't I be baptized? And so to say that it was a little traumatic, and we started to really worry and pray a lot about whether or not we were handling that right. Now looking back, I think we did. There was always that desire for intentionality that we never really recognized. And, you know, a couple of years after it started, it felt like it kind of, you know, became something that was truly on his heart. And, you know, he got baptized last year on his 13th birthday. You know, Jacob, she just whispered in my ear when we started talking about this. Jacob, he asked me about it the other night, and
It's always at bedtime, like, you're it's the end of the day, you're like, it's time for bed, it's time for bed.
it does.
I'm such a bad, I mean, I'm, like, ask your dad tomorrow.
I've punched out. Sorry, not the mom.
Yeah, kind of bug, I'm sure. What
Extra bonus step, because Peyton goes to Castle Hills.
Yeah.
And so they're the Baptist tradition. So she has a wonderful second grade teacher, such an awesome lady. And so in second grade, Peyton prayed in school to bring Jesus to her heart. Y'all, most of y'all know that I'm super stuffy, that's why I'm even crying. So Peyton prayed in school to bring Jesus to her heart. Also, like, all kids today are more mature than I was at seven when I got baptized because my grandpa was a preacher. But Peyton prayed in school to bring Jesus to her heart. So then fast forward, you know, when she's been in Bible class and coming to the youth groups and she wants to be baptized, you know, I thought we had that little bonus step. But I'm glad we're in this class. We have lots of goals as parents. I want to protect her from things, and I have a lot of things that I want her to do with her life. But y'all, this is the goal for their life. We're a steward of our children. We have lots of things to protect them from, lots of things we want them to do, but that's why we're here, to add them to God's kingdom. You know, that's the biggest goal of our life.
Yeah, well said.
Well, we have a lot of talk about intentionality, but as we're talking about this, I'm thinking, I wonder what baptism looked like in Jesus' time. And I have to imagine there wasn't a whole lot of like, okay, well, let's go over here, let's have a 6-week study about if you really want to follow me, and you really understand what that means, and what that's going to look like for the rest of your life. No, it was like, I want to follow you, and just like, awesome, let's go. And if we're really wanting to reflect what that spirit of baptism was, that's what it looked like.
Yeah, there was no chlorine in the.
I saw that. I got to see an example of that kind of stuff growing up, because my parents took me on mission trips with them to Ukraine. My first one when I was 9, and they were doing these big, what they call campaigns, and I mean hundreds of people, and my dad and the fellow preachers weren't asking, do you feel like you're ready? You know, mostly because they didn't speak Russian, but it wasn't important. It was the zeal that these people were like racing to the front to be like, let's go to the river.
Yeah,
And I mean,
let's go, yeah.
they're dunking women in their underwear. I'm not kidding. Like, we have pictures of these mission trips. We've got men in Speedos, we've got men in bras and chains, and they're like dunking them, you know, by the hundreds. And it's very moving. So, yeah.
And it's interesting that, were you the one who said that your dad was a preacher and that's why you got baptized? No. Oh, okay. I was like thinking that's interesting that we would feel like it was just something to do when we have these studies, but then for some reason when we're missionaries, it's suddenly okay to not have 6-week things. Like, oh, you learned about Jesus yesterday and you're ready, cool, but we don't allow our children that same right.
Yeah, I was gonna just say, I kind of see baptism as the very beginning of a journey, way more than like there's not a thing I needed to complete. I needed to know where I wanted to go. And I got on that boat, you know, like it's the beginning. It's not the end. It's not a completion of tasks. It's not I already got rid of the sin from my life that's never going to go away. You know, I didn't have to prove I could be good for 3 weeks or whatever.
How does church camp baptism work these days? Like, do they call home and check, like, is your child mature enough? Because I feel like decades ago,
They call parents and say your child wants to be baptized, and usually parents come out.
Well, and I also had to check a box if I was going to allow my child to get baptized at camp.
Yeah, when we, yeah.
Did you check a lot?
Like my kids should be baptized in
There would be people at Camp Bandina that would get like second baptized. Or,
Yeah.
that was like the first one didn't really say it.
So as we paint the picture for our vision, we talked about the beginning of our family. I mean, well said, this is our goal for right, to be the kingdom, to be Christians throughout their life. And this is part of that journey. Just something to think about that I thought was cool. We haven't done this, but just a cool thing to think about. In the New Testament, there's 5 stories about baptism where the entire family is baptized. That the head of the house leaves, and then when he believes, his entire household is baptized. These are all new converts to Christianity, right? So none of us would fall into that group. I'm being filmed, so it's pretty dangerous that this is going out. But I think what would be a really cool thing for a family is if the entire family follows the New Testament and says, we're all getting baptized together. This is something that we're all going to do together. We're all on this journey together. This is our family vision. Kids, maybe you've been baptized before, maybe you haven't, but all together we're being baptized and sharing this vision together of what baptism means for our family. I had to talk to my wife about that, see if she buys it. All right, so challenge for you this week. Be intentional, but then let the Spirit move too, right? Don't you say, crush the Spirit and how He's working with your kids. That would be part of that. All right. Let's see, next week we're
We
doing,
have 2 weeks of Ben,
yes.
then mental health, then finish with prayer.
Okay, so Ben's talking about technology, and then mental health, panel, and then race experience. I think you guys